Hey everybody. We should be streaming now. Let me get the Benny Goodman music going here. There we go.
Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Benny's a little loud, so we'll turn that down. Alright, good evening everybody. Hey Chris, Gene, and Martin. Hey Karen. Hey Jeff, Bob, Katie, Lorena, John, Kathleen, Rodney, Darlene, hey on YouTube, hey. Hey Jerry, hey Luann, hey Jeff and Amy, hey Wexley. Miles is all set.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band.
Hello, Mother.
Recorded rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Skies.
Alright, we are ready to rock out. Hey Jordana, hey Diane. There's only one way to Hoch. Hey Trish and Madison, hey Carrie, hey Lee. Hey Octavio, Timothy, Vicky. There's Laura and Chandra, Joanne and Vicky, Darlene and Rich and Casey, Cindy and Timothy, Christy and Jennifer, Katie and Aviva. Hey Jackie. My color in this tiny window I got of myself up here. This is revolting. There we go. Better anyway. Hey Katie, Georgia. Hey Diane and Gail. Hey everybody. All good vibes for Bucky. Hey, Chris. Hey, Amy. I don't know if Hoch's really showing in this shot. He kind of does that, like... it might be from retouching, too. Just about every newspaper photo was retouched at the time. It wasn't, like, trying to trick you or anything. Just trying to make the photos look presentable. Hey, Jeff, Christina. Hey, Priya and Rebecca. Hey, Gregory and Brooklyn. I think Ambrose is the youngest fan now. Laura, I hear you. Hey, Johann's with us. Hey, Emily and Gail. Evening, Alicia. I'll be right back. I just heard a noise that sounded like a cat getting in trouble. Yeah, Priya's really into knocking garbage cans over. The one under my desk is Velcroed down now. Hey, Helene, hey, Lynn. Hi, Laura on YouTube. Hey, Susan. My sinuses are ready for this weather to go away. Personally, I'm fine with it. Hey, Christine.
I love you. Again, I love you with all my heart.
Hey, Kathleen at band rehearsal. In the back row. Hey, Beverly and Karen in New Mexico. Hey, Kathy.
To say again, I love you.
Yeah, this shirt just doesn't button very well. Really no. Hey, Jennifer on YouTube. Hey, Carrie. Hey, Carrie. At the front row. Priya, what are you knocking over now? Priya? Silly kitty.
I will
With all my hawk, yeah.
telling of the miracle the day Hoch came along.
Hey, Luann and Judy.
To say again, I love you with all my heart.
Hey, Jerry in Arizona. Erev Tov, Lisa. Oh, Carol, that's wild. Now, Eric, I'm pretty sure Terry would not have been able to find this unless he, for some reason, was leafing through the microfilm of the Chicago Evening American. You can get shingles at 48? That's a little close. I thought you had to be 50 to get the vaccine for it. Arlie, this is Benny Goodman, live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Or it was live when they broadcast it in 1935. Trying to think if I can quite trace Hoch to the Congress Hotel. I definitely not to the Congress itself, but the area around it. Not a lot of stuff about him in the loop. I'll be glad to get the shingles vaccine as soon as they'll give it to me. But give me one for rickets while you're at it. Evening, everybody just joining us. All these shingles stories are definitely making me want to get the shot. I could maybe lie my age. I feel like that's when you got to be 54. If there's a shot for the Ricketts family, I'd take that. Yeah, if I could get something to protect me from the Ricketts family, then yes.
And they all loved it. They all loved those fashions when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same
50,
vein.
you gotta be 50, but I want it now. I could probably lie to the CVS. You ever see that Ren and Stimpy where they get artificial varicose veins so they can sneak into places? Alright, we'll let Benny do another tune here. And they ask your age on the form, so they're not gonna like cut off my wrist to check the rings. Now I'm all very concerned about the rickets. The shingles, the rickets. I'm old enough to start putting "the" in front of diseases, you know. Nah, 40 is the new 25, Katie. Marita, yeah, you should probably get the measles shot. Hey, Mickey and Mercer. And have a smile while we're talking about killing folks and breaking stuff. But hey, that's what we do. Part of why I stick to the older cases here. Publisher's asking me to move it up a little bit for a future project, but I don't know. $75 is the new 50, Carolyn. Hello, Christine. We're letting Benny Goodman finish up one more tune here. Hey, Mary Beth. All right, Benny is wrapping up here. An $11 bus trip with 7th and 8th graders. At some point, get on the microphone and say, let's go for a trip on our favorite rocket ship. They will all start singing the Little Einstein song. I've never seen the Little Einstein show, but they will all start singing it. It works with just about every group. I keep wondering when it's going to stop. I don't know how current that show is anymore. But all right, that's it for Benny Goodman. Put up all my windows here. And all right, everybody, welcome along. Where's that picture? Okay. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Murder Maps USA, which just came out a few months ago through Thames and Hudson, and coming this August, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets from University of Illinois Press. I'm an academic now. I love it when I get published by schools that would never have taken me as a student. All right, so I'm also on a History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time. I was on History last week on a show called I Was There. I'm heading to New York on Monday to do some talking head shots for a new Netflix show, so I am incredibly famous, and you should definitely pay attention to whatever I say. I'm slightly nervous about this one. There's a lot of moving parts in the Johann Hoch story. A lot of stuff, a lot of names that newspapers at the time just couldn't keep straight because there was a lot of information coming in, more than they could really handle at once. So, names, it's hard to figure out what someone's actual name was. It's hard to figure out which stories were true and which ones were just speculation. I've been trying to put this all together. Well, I did about 5 months ago, the first time we did this tour. I've given myself a bit of a refresher since then, but there's just such a lot of data with this one that has never really been properly parsed. Johann Hoch, the Bluebeard of Chicago, is a story that still has not really been properly researched, even to the extent that it can be. I'd like to do something about it. My agent just does not think he's famous enough to have. I wish somebody would write a hugely popular but wildly inaccurate book about him, so there might be a market for a more accurate one. But all right, everybody, we're going to start right in on the Nickel Plate Railroad. The year is 1905. Ice cream costs a nickel. Ragtime is the cat's meow. Now we're on this railroad track here. May 1905, a train road journey was taken by a guy by the name of Johann Hoch on the left here, seen regaling the crowd, accompanied by a journalist named Evelyn Campbell. Well, really, her name was Nana Springer. She rode under the name of Evelyn Campbell. They rode on a Pullman car all across the Nickel Plate Railroad, along with Detective Loftus, going from New York to Chicago, where Hoch was going to stand trial for bigamy and possibly murder. Now, this guy was accused of having been married to at least 20 different women, several of whom were now dead. In other accounts, it was up to 55 women. On the train, he just regaled the crowd by being completely goofy. He said, "Oh, could I really be so fat and happy if I had 20 wives?" This is really how he talked. Newspapers made a lot of the fact that he talked like a German dialect comedian. Looked like the guy on the Pringles can, talked like a German character on The Simpsons. One person asked him as he went, "What were the names of all of your wives?" And he said, "Oh, the last one was Mrs. Johann Hoch. The one before that was Mrs. Johann Hoch. The one before that..." You kind of get the idea here. At one point they said, how come so many of them died?" He said, "Oh, kidney failure, I suppose." By this time, he was all over the news. By the time they got to Chicago, there was a huge crowd waiting at the station for them. Really, the story had started about a decade ago, but it only come to light, really only heated up about 6 weeks ago, back here in Chicago, right on Willow Street. So this is Willow in the Old Town neighborhood. It's difficult to triangulate some of these things. You can go through a renumbering guide, but sometimes maps make it look a little bit different. But somewhere here, right about at the corner of Willow and Larrabee. Now, it's renumbering guide would say it's right about where this building on the left is here, the 3-story one. But its descriptions make it sound like it's a little bit closer to the corner. In any case, there was a candy store here operated by a woman by the name of Marie Walker. Now, she was a widow from Germany. Most of Hoch's victims were widows from Germany. And at one point, she answered an ad in a matrimonial ad in the newspaper. See, in those days, there were a lot of matrimonial agencies who were involved in finding people's spouses. There were a lot of ads in newspapers you could play saying, "I am so-and-so looking for someone to marry me." These were great prey for swindlers all along. So, one day, Marie answers an ad by a guy by the name of Johann Hoch. Now, Johann came into her candy store and they talked for a little bit, and eventually he said, "All right, I like you, you like me, we can get married then, yeah?" And she said yes, immediately sold the candy store to somebody for $75. Hoch took the $75, married her, and took her to live at his house on Union. Now, this would have been fairly near the Disco Salad Bar at 64th and Low. Now, it's a stretch of road that no longer even exists, but it would have been in the middle of where this field is right now. There was a cottage that looked like this. It's now a field for a school. So they moved into this place, Hoch and Marie, and almost immediately, Marie began to get sick. So Johann managed to bring in her sister Amelia. They hadn't been close for years, but he managed to get them to patch things up so that Amelia could help with Marie's sickness. This is an earlier picture of Amelia. And in the later trial transcripts, it talks a great deal about all of the various things they had to insert into various orifices. I will spare you the gory details of that, but they must have really made up. But before too long, Marie had died of kidney failure, nephritis. Now, this is something they didn't think of right at the time, but that was a disease that you got from ingesting arsenic. So while the body was still lying there on the bed, Hoch proposed to Amelia, her sister. And initially she said, "You can't say things like that when my sister's body is lying right there." And he said, "No, to the dead belong the dead, the living belong to the living." And after a little bit of wooing, she agreed. So Marie was buried over at Oakwood Cemetery. Now, exactly where, I couldn't really tell you. It's somewhere in this section, down in the southwest corner of the cemetery. I asked them if they could be more specific about the section. They just said, no, over in the office. So she was buried here. And immediately on the ride back, Hoch was telling Amelia how their life was going to be, how everything was going to be different for her now. Almost immediately, he took all of her money and fled away. So her other sister had come to tell her to watch out, there's a lot of swindling going on, but Hoch was already gone with all of her money. People started to get suspicious, and Marie was exhumed to see if there might be any arsenic in her body. Now, once this story came out, the coffin was frozen over, there was an exhumation going on, newspapers got wind of this pretty early on. Now, let's just set the scene a little bit. Chicago, late 1904. The chief of police was a guy by the name of Francis O'Neill, who was really better remembered as a folk song collector. It was generally known that if he would skip off the police work in a heartbeat if he heard that out in Joliet there was some old Irish widow who knew an Irish folk tune that he hadn't collected. And nobody really complained about this because the Chicago police were so famously inept and corrupt in those days that this was probably more productive to fighting crime than actually doing police work. Meanwhile, there was also Detective George Shippy, who would later become the inspector, the chief of police. He was Inspector Shippy at the time. Always given to doing very strange things was Mr. Shippy. He always had these weird ideas about like renting a horse that he thought had been involved in a murder to see if the horse could lead him to the dead body. That never actually worked. So we've got a kind of a weird and bumbling police department here in Chicago at the time. And meanwhile, newspapers were a very interesting place in 1905. Here's a paper from 10 years before. This is during the H.H. Holmes investigation. You can see that there's not much exciting here. If you turn the page, there might be a couple of drawings, but there are no photographs yet, no really big banner headlines. Graphic design or design in general is not something they were really thinking about at the time. But after 10 years, newspapers had gotten a lot better at things like graphic design and printing photographs. You'd almost never see that in 1905. 1905, it was everywhere. You'd have these headlines like this. This is a Chicago American from right around the time that Hoch and his wife were getting married. Hoch and Marie. And they were doing things like recreating murder sites. There's one from a few months later when Marshall Field Jr. was found shot. Field in death race to save son. Headlines had gotten bigger. Photographs were everywhere. And these were... There's no right nice way to say that these were absolute tabloids. The Chicago American in particular would print any rumor they could dream up. But here's the thing, a lot of papers like that were horribly unreliable and given to printing any rumor they could imagine, but they were also doing really good investigative journalism too. It's like the rest of the stuff paid for the good stuff. So over in Lakeview are the Brewster apartment buildings, which still stand today, magnificent building here. In it lived Nana Springer, also known as Evelyn Campbell, who did all kinds of work for her. I'll cover as much of her as I can. She did a lot of different work for the paper. Sometimes it was just like beauty advice or domestic advice, but also she would interview murderers. Later on, she would help get a person she thought was wrongfully convicted saved from the gallows. But pretty soon she started covering the Hoch thing, asking questions. They were even advertising, "Are you following Miss Campbell's Hoch clues? The detectives are." Which is entirely possible. She was doing more research into this case, honestly, than the detectives. But through her work and the police work and the other journalists' work, they started piecing together the story of this guy, Johann Hoch. Now, the first time we can really trace him and verify him in the United States is back in Wheeling, West Virginia in 1895. Just about 10 years earlier to this. Over here at 48th and Jacob in the town of Wheeling, there was this house where a guy by the name of Jacob Huff, fresh off the boat from Germany, was operating a saloon. Far as I know, this is the same building. It might actually still be standing here. But he met a woman by the name of Carolyn Hoch, pictured here, and the two got married. There are a few different drawings of a picture of the two of them together. This is about as close as I found to a proper version of the photograph. I know it's got to be out there someplace. But it seems like papers couldn't get their hands on the real ones. They just had to come up with like drawings and composites. But the two of them got married, and she started to get sick right away, and even told her minister, Reverend Hes, that she thought that she might have been poisoned. And by she died. Hes started going around Wheeling, talking to different drugstores about this Jacob Huff guy. What's he been buying from you? Has he been buying any poison? Yes, it turned out that he had been buying poison. And as the case around him started to build, Jacob Huff, who changed his last name to Hoch, decided to fake his death. He took off all of his clothes and left them on the banks of the Ohio River. Now, incidentally, there's an old folk song about I asked my love to take a walk, and then I killed her and threw her from the banks of the Ohio. This was his attempt. The idea was to make it look like he had jumped into the river and drowned. But as the newspaper says, it deceived no one. Now, Reverend Hes started writing to Germany to try to find out about this guy. He sent back this picture. He was able to obtain this picture. People in Germany wrote back to him explaining the whole thing, at least what they knew of it. The mayor of his hometown wrote back that this guy was a wine merchant back over here. He was a laborer. He fled the country when he got in some hot water. He had a wife and a kid. There are rumors of some dead wives, but there were rumors that he had married a woman on the ship over from Germany, and then she died as soon as they landed. Some stories have him in the States back as far early as 1882. Best info that Reverend Hes was able to get is that he probably came here in 1895. This is his German wife, Anna Hoch. But Carolyn would eventually be exhumed. Reverend Hes arranged to have her body dug up and found, for one thing, it was too badly decomposed to tell very much. The body had been treated with arsenic, so there was really no way to get a conviction for arsenic poisoning. Not to mention, in later accounts, Hes said that somebody had already dug her body up and stolen a couple of the internal organs, including her stomach. So there was no way to prove that she had been murdered at this point. All he could really do was kind of wait around. Now, Hoch, meanwhile, moved to Chicago, where he opened a saloon near Milwaukee and Western. Would have been right around this general vicinity, maybe a little to the left of this. Started asking around, telling everybody, hey, I need a wife. Do you know anybody that I can marry? That was my worst attempt at a German accent yet right there. So somebody told him about the old widow Steinbrecher who lived on Belmont, kind of near where the bucket of blood is now. We'll kind of loop around from this. If you guys remember the day that we filmed this is the day I bought this lamp. So she lived up about where this block is now. It's difficult, again, with the building long gone, it's tough to pinpoint the exact space. But here is the best picture there is, the most clear picture there is of Mr. Hoch is this one, the wedding picture with Marie. Marie Steinbrecher, also known as Julia Steinbrecher. Once again, they change names a lot in these things. So there's their wedding picture. And very similarly, right after the wedding, she started to get sick and told people that she thought that she might have been poisoned. By and by, she died, and her body was taken to the Kraups Funeral Home, which stood right over here on Belmont near Ashland, about where the Lakeview building is now. Previously looked like this. And as the funeral carriage was going away from here up to Graceland Cemetery, just as the police stopped it and said, I've got reason to believe that this woman was poisoned. Stop the carriage. But Hoch pulled out a death certificate saying, nope, she died of disease, natural causes. And without any further evidence, they had nothing left but to let them go on to Graceland Cemetery. Now, she had probably been killed with arsenic. And one thing, I haven't been able to look up the file card here that'll mention whether she's buried in a vault or what kind of coffin she's in. They actually do usually have that on file. She would be just to the left of this marked grave by the tree. Hers is unmarked, but arsenic is an element. So if she was poisoned with arsenic, there's a pretty good chance the arsenic that killed her is still buried right here at Graceland Cemetery. And the same thing with his other wives, too. If they re-exhumed them now, the arsenic, the body itself might be long gone. But assuming that the coffin is reasonably intact, or if it's inside of a vault, the arsenic is probably still there. As this is a very cold tour. It was all filmed back in January. So a couple of weeks later on North Wayne Street, he met a woman by the name of Minnie Rankin, also known as Mary Rankin or Emma Rankin. Also, Rankin is spelled about 9 different ways. He met her through a matrimonial agency and found out that she had about $3,000 in the bank. So he moved into here, and I believe this brick house in the middle might be the original house. But she found that he had a pistol and stole all of the bullets. Then one day he came up to her with the gun saying, "You ought to give me all of your money," acting like he was just joking. But she was glad to know that she actually already had the bullets herself, so she just disappeared out into a back alley, didn't see him again, may have actually been trying to swindle him the entire time. She had been running that kind of scam with matrimonial agencies herself. She had already been through a couple of other husbands, even spent a couple of weeks in prison after a murder accusation. Details of this are a little bit lacking, but I am confident that it did happen. Now, meanwhile, as the police and the reporters started poking around, they couldn't help but notice that the Disco Salad Bar, where the Disco Salad Bar is now, the old Union Avenue place, was just around the corner. And the block and around the corner from the site of the H.H. Holmes Murder Castle building. Now, H.H. Holmes was the guy now famously known as the Devil in the White City, who built a 3-story building at 63rd and Wallace that is said to have been rigged up with everything you could possibly need to kill a person. We now call it the Murder Castle. So Hoch lived literally a stone's throw from the place. Newspapers started running interviews with people who lived in the neighborhood who said, "Yes, I knew that guy. He was hanging around the castle all the time." But what they couldn't find was a really good, reliable witness. They had people who lived around the corner but somehow knew who collected all the rent inside of the place. The person who was most sure was M.G. Chappell, the skeleton articulator, whose story had completely fallen apart in 1895. And completely fell apart this time, too. The guy who worked in the jewelry shop at the time, Dr. Richardson, was brought in, and he said, "No, never seen this guy before in my life." He was always more of a straight shooter. But newspapers got really into this. They thought maybe he was J.C. Allen or Mr. Hatch, the guy that Holmes said was really doing all of the killing. Then they decided maybe he was an identical twin of this guy Toombs, who was hanged in Chicago a couple of years ago. They look almost alike, if you only go by the mustache, maybe? But newspapers just loved playing connect the dots in those days. A few years later came the case of Belle Gunness. They found lots and lots of bodies in the buried around the farm after Belle Gunness's place burned down, presumably killing her in the process. One of the bodies was said to be Justina Leffler, whose relatives had said that she disappeared after marrying someone who kind of matched Hoch's description. One story for a while was maybe Hoch married her, then sent her to Belle to be killed. But then a cousin came to identify the body, which I guess was still in fairly good shape in 1908, and said that it was actually definitely not her. So this is all kind of falling apart. It still comes up quite a bit that people say that Johann Hoch got his start as an apprentice of H.H. Holmes. I think it's more likely he might have been a bit of a Holmes fanboy. He did buy a place awfully near the castle site. So next in his timeline, well, he got in some trouble and ended up doing a little bit of time in the Bridewell, in the jail, around 1898. When he got out, he went to a Eugenie Street boarding house, and I believe this is the original building here, where he met a woman by the name of Elizabeth Gerke, also known as Mary Gerke. She was the woman who operated the place. He got married to her and begged her to get some life insurance. Then when she got sick, she insisted, if I don't feel better soon, I'll go to the hospital. And he said, "No, don't go to the hospital. I'll take care of you." And she said, "No, I will just go get an actual doctor." And he got mad and left. leaving behind things like a trunk full of magic equipment, magician supplies. And Hoch does kind of look like the evil magician in the Care Bears movie now that I think about it. Also in the trunk was this book, a complete mail-order course on hypnotism, and a diploma from a hypnotist college. They've got a drawing of him over it, but they actually published the College of Hypnotism thing. So here is a live look at what happened in newsrooms when they could connect a multi-murderer and a bigamist to hypnotism. Oh, were the tabloids thrilled about this. So all of a sudden, people were writing in saying things like, Hoch hypnotized me with a magical zither. Now, people who said that he had married them and deserted them were popping up just out of the woodwork, and the mesmerism stories came up right away. Hoch a hypnotist, 26 wives. I believe Kristen has a t-shirt out of this. So now we're up to about 1902 in the timeline. Late 1903, Hoch was living in Pullman. This is a neighborhood on the very far south side, built for Pullman Palace Car Company workers, of which Hoch was one. And right here is the house where he lived with a woman named Anna of Hendricks. Now, he told Anna, there's a really good shot Kristen took of that. Now, he had told Anna, listen, I'm going to be super rich as soon as my dad dies. And also, he said, I know your husband who just died doesn't have a tombstone. Let's build him a magnificent tombstone. I'll pay for it. And Anna was so touched by this that she married him. Shortly thereafter, he said, I just got a telegram saying to come to Germany at once. My father's about to die. I'm going to need all your money so I can get to Germany. So she gave him all of her money. He bid her farewell, sang her a bit of a popular song of the day called Goodbye, Dolly Gray, then got on the train to go to Germany, and was never heard from again. Here's Anna. She's one of the most photographed of the wives. Here's their actual marriage certificate even showed up. And these were just a few. There were other stories that came up later that, among those that are most likely to be true, there was a woman named Martha Hertzfeld, Martha Hertzfeld. And after he married her, he said, why don't you write a check of all your money to your sister, Augusta Hertzfeld? So she did that, but he erased the A on Augusta, so it just said August, went to the bank and said, hello, I'm August Hertzfeld. Please give me all of this money. Then he disappeared. Later, she claimed that he must have hypnotized her. A lot of people who got swindled like this later said, oh, he must have hypnotized me. It was just convenient, probably made them feel a little less humiliated. Then there was Mary Becker, 1903 in St. Louis. She died a few months after the wedding. Hoch got her insurance and all of her money, then hit her friends up for loans, and then disappeared. So a woman by the name of Sophia Fink married him in 1902, found out he had other wives, and left him. Moved to Aurora, where she claimed that she had been hypnotized. So these stories just kept coming up and up. We got up to wife number 45. There were rumors that he may have killed as many as 16 of them. I like the hula dance thing that he's doing here. So while all of these stories were being pieced together, Hoch was missing. Now, eventually, he was caught back in New York. Down on 47th Street in what would now be Hell's Kitchen, just west of Midtown, not too far away from Times Square. There was a boarding house here owned by a woman by the name of Catherine Kimmerell. Now, there was a guy who checked in under the name Henry Bartles, and he chatted with Catherine a little bit and offered to help with the cooking and said, wouldn't you like to be married to me? I'd make a good husband. Why don't we get married? She heard him saying things like that, and then immediately thought about these stories she'd seen in the newspapers about that awful man in Chicago. So she went to the cops. The cops were pretty convinced that he was the right person, so they knocked on the door and said, hello, Hoch. And Hoch said, how do you do? Then said, I'm not Hoch, my name is Henry Bartles. He was a very easy guy to trip up, and this is one of the most remarkable things that I found in researching this, is one of the best sources for sorting out fact from fiction is Hoch himself. Not that he wasn't trying to cover things up, but he was really easy to trip up. People could trick him into admitting things without a whole heck of a lot of trouble. So, breathlessly, the papers announced that Hoch, the Chicago Bluebeard, had been caught. And not only was he in the boarding house, already having proposed to what might have been wife number 55, but was carrying a fountain pen loaded up with arsenic. So, meanwhile, back in Chicago, there was an inquest at which a few of his wives showed up. This is Mary Gerke, Anna Hendrickson, and Amelia Hoch. And there's just a little bit of their conversation was transcribed by the papers, and it literally opened with one of them saying, "Well, I never." Also present was Mary Gerke. There's Minnie Rankin. Some of them were there for this, and some of them were not. So Evelyn Campbell, that newspaper reporter I mentioned earlier, offered to take Anna Hendrickson to New York. So they went out to New York to the police station where there was a lineup of 12 men. She walked right up to Johann Hoch and said, "Hello, John." And Hoch said, "I'm sorry, Mary." Then said, "Wait a minute, I don't know you." Meanwhile, it had been determined back in Chicago that Marie's body did in fact have arsenic in it. So this was something that they published in a lot of papers. And this is kind of how they would do pictures at the time. You can see they had a profile shot of Johann and a profile shot of Catherine, and they just added their heads onto drawings of their bodies. You can also see Evelyn Campbell in the background there. And arsenic, again, had been found inside of the wife. So Hoch was escorted back to Chicago. And it was during this, Evelyn interviewed him for pretty much the entire trip. There were crowds at every station. He went back and forth between denying everything and admitting everything, and also just giving the best quips, the best quotes he could think up. Things like, "When a man is married, he swears to love. After, he loves to swear." I very much doubt that was original on his part. But he talked to her all the way back, went back and forth between denying and admitting things, but again, it was very easy to trip up. So in Chicago, he was taken straight to the police station, then to the jail back behind the criminal court building. The criminal court building still stands. Now, one by one, they brought his various Chicago wives in to talk to him. They brought in Minnie Rankin, the woman he had married, who was probably trying to swindle him at the same time. And she came in and just kind of taunted, "You didn't get any of my money." And Hoch said, "Careful, you're a bigamist too, you know." At which point she kind of shut up. They brought Mary Gerke in, and he said, "You've been telling all these lies about hypnotism." Meanwhile, the guy who had come in with her, Mr. Benno, said, "That man is the limit. Still owes me $200 for the wine party." Emily Fisher came in and said, "You dirty dog, you are the man who swindled me out of my $750. Also, he killed her sister, too. That's kind of a thing. But Hoch was treated almost like royalty in prison, not just by the other prisoners, but by the police officers. She was, their idea here was if they butter him up, maybe he'll confess. Which is totally the opposite of how they usually tried to get people to confess in those days. There was a woman who was the prison matron. He proposed to her, of course. Said, "It's all right, I'll soon be out of here. I'll be making a fortune in dime museums." Which is entirely possible. Amelia already was working in a dime museum, just letting people pay to come in and gawk at her a little bit. She didn't enjoy it, but it paid really well. Newspapers started publishing things like the many moods of Johann Hoch: puzzled, inquisitive, observing, attentive, nodding, aroused. If you wanted to know what Johann Hoch looked like aroused, well, there it is, I suppose. They even took him out to places like the still standing Bush Temple building to have his hair cut, and newspapers started publishing things like Valentines of him. Now, it was also noted that whenever he went out, the people would always shout, which makes it especially interesting that he called himself John Jacob Schmidt on one of his marriage licenses. Just like John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, whenever he went out, the people would always shout. Really reminds me, a few years ago, I made like a crack on Twitter. It's like, today I'm researching the historical John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, who killed 9 people and ate their bones, which is left out of most modern versions of the song. People thought I was serious. It's one of those things, it does kind of sound like the kind of thing that would turn out to be true, or at least turn out to be a real urban legend. So Hoch also gave several interviews about his methods. He said flattery was really his stock in trade. He said, it takes a smart man to do what I have done. Johann is no fool. They outlined everything he had done. Really, it was a case of find out what she wants, be that guy for a month. He did deny that he had any idea how to play the zither, though. So, at the trial, the chief witness against him was Amelia Fisher Hoch. It came out at the time that he had one other marriage in between, back in October of 1904, just a couple of months before marrying Marie and then Amelia. He had married a woman named Carolyn in Philadelphia, and she was still alive. The fact that he was married to her meant that the marriage to Marie and therefore Amelia was invalid, so she was what was called a competent witness against him. Now here's the thing, he thought that he was going to get away with this because arsenic was in embalming fluid. In those days, it was very difficult to get a conviction for arsenic poisoning. As soon as the undertaker stepped into a room, it was pretty much impossible. But in this case, he hadn't been following the embalming arts and sciences. They were able to determine that this was not arsenic used in the embalming fluid on Marie, so if there was a whole lot of arsenic in the dead body, that was a pretty clear sign that he had been murdered. Now, for her part, as soon as he was convicted, Amelia forgave everything and spent days in jail begging him to take her back. By and by, they continued talking about the many moods of Johann Hoch, how he was kind of this Jekyll and Hyde type character. On more than one occasion, he was sentenced to go to he was given a day to the gallows and spent a night in what was called the death cell. It was the most comfortable room in the prison. It was the library. And he would spend the night praying there and going through the whole march up to the gallows. But then at one point, like Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, always a wild card, said, nope, let it go, let the appeal process go on a couple more days. And the Chicago Evening American just went nuts waiting on these various stays of execution. They were publishing a new edition about once an hour, as they did at the time. It wasn't like the 24-hour news cycle, but it was pretty close. The Chicago Evening American would publish extras day after day after day. So at the 12 a.m. shot, Hoch dressed for the gallows. Afternoon edition, I'll not hang, says Johann Hoch. Hoch prays to jailers at the gallows. Later afternoon edition. Asked the U.S. court to stop hanging. Then finally, Hoch hanged. One interesting report is out in Philadelphia. His next to last surviving wife, Carolyn, celebrated and said that she could tell psychically the moment that he died. We'll close up with a couple of shots from the graveyards. Hoch was initially buried at Dunning, which was the potter's field at the time, the place where they buried unclaimed bodies in unmarked graves. Today there's like the Dunning Memorial Park. So the city just forgot this thing was here for decades until the 1980s when they started digging out basements to build luxury houses. And you can guess what they found. Even now, anywhere between Irving Park and Montrose around here at Belle Plaine, they tend to find stuff. So he was in an unmarked grave here for a bit, but only for a few weeks. It was just barely noted in the papers, but it was noted in one of them that eventually he was moved to Elmwood Cemetery, where he is somewhere in this section. And I couldn't figure out exactly where. They told me they didn't have the paperwork on exactly where. Most of the burials here are from much later than him. At the time he was first buried, he must have had the entire place to himself. But I figure it must be one of these places that's not quite marked. Also covered just briefly, that was the Behringer house that survived the Great Chicago Fire. Just about 2 doors down from that is Inspector Shippy's house.
All right.
A couple of years later, a guy named Lazarus Averbuck knocked on the door here, We don't really know what he wanted. It could have been, the official cause was it must have been an assassination attempt. We don't really know. As soon as he got inside, Shippy started shooting. And now there's a plaque here honoring him. It was Shippy's last day in uniform anyway. He was off to a sanitarium after this. But that, folks, is the story of Johann Hoch. And James over in the comments, Elmwood is in River Grove? I think River Grove is the name of it. But it's over in the Chicago suburbs. But I want to go ahead and plug some upcoming virtual tours here. Well, actually, before that, we're a little early on time. I'll show a couple of other pictures. Here's a great newspaper drawing of Hoch being haunted by all of his many wives, or the young versions of most of them. There's one of all the wives waiting at the Chicago... Yeah, that's what the train station looked like in Chicago. All of the women waiting for a Hoch to show up with their rolling pins at the ready. There's a composite sketch of what his victims looked like. The devil consulting with Hoch and Holmes and all the people they had killed in front of the I Will lady, a Chicago symbol at the time. Here's how Hoch might look in disguise with a beard, with pictures of his various wives around him. Marie Hoch's death certificate. It says here the cause of death was nephritis. That's got their address, 6430 Union. And that's one address that wouldn't have changed between now and then. A lot of them were changed in 1909, but not usually on the number, not usually that kind of grid. Here they are testing Marie's organs in the lab. Small version of the cabinet card. And here's the big one again. That's one I actually had to pay for. It's public domain, but to get the high quality scan, sometimes they do make you pay. It's worth it for the really good stuff. So, okay, quick plug for the upcoming events. Sunday morning, the next virtual tour will be True Crime Stories in Chicago Cemeteries. Probably be a couple of repeats from this. Thursday, a week from today, we'll be doing Swindlers and Con Artists, one of my very favorite ones. But we've got a couple of upcoming in-person ones as well. Saturday, we will be doing Rose Hill Cemetery at noon. I'm aiming to make that a little bit different from my usual Rose Hill route. I'm working on adding a couple of different things into it and just changing it up a little bit. I've been doing the same route there for a few years, and I love my route there. But, we've had a lot of regulars, so I might as well mix it up a bit. I just might have bitten off more than I can chew, with doing this plus the New York stuff coming up. But then a week from that, May 14th, in the evening in Lincoln Park, we'll be doing Grave Robbing 101. One of my favorite walking tours that I've only recently been able to do again in person because of construction in Lincoln Park. Information for all of that is at Adam Chicago or MysteriousChicago.com. Also on tomorrow night at 6:30, you'll be on the Patty Vasquez Show doing Whiskey and a Cookie. Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page doing the Whiskey and a Cookie Show, our weekly talk show. I was on her show on WCPT most of the afternoon today. And of course, we do mini tours on the Mysterious Chicago Facebook pretty much every day at 10 o'clock. Should you need Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, etc., go to cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. That's got everything you need, including the new Johann Hoch Rock Out with Your Hawk Out t-shirts. Big seller. And with that, I will put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will just hang out like we always do. So thanks for joining me, everybody. Here's Benny. Was there a photographer on the train from New York to Chicago? Carol, I believe there was. Barbara, the Disco Salad Bar is occasionally open. Or it was as of a few years ago. It's officially been closed for a while, but I have been by there when there was an event. Did Hoch have any children? He had at least one back in Germany. Beyond that, I don't know. Most of his wives in Chicago and the United States were past childbearing age. Thanks, Phoenix. Yes, if you're new here, there is a Facebook page called Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club. Miles is my cat. He made an appearance already once today. Oh yeah, of course, tomorrow is Find a Grave Friday. I gotta figure out who I'm gonna find. Melissa, somebody somewhere might have Hoch DNA. Depends on whether his kids over in Germany ever had kids. Etc. Melissa, my tonsils feel fine now. At about a week, one of them in particular just swole up a lot. It must have been an allergic reaction to something, but I don't know what. Oh, Amy, do not give me bonus points for the German accents. They're very bad. Oh, we're still talking about shingles? You guys are gonna freak me out. I really don't know why nobody ever took my tonsils out. It seems like it would be a reasonable move. When I got my nostrils roto-rooted a few years back, they probably just should have done that while I was out. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for anybody who can kick in on these on Venmo, PayPal, or joining the Patreon. If you've been trying to hit with the stars, I really appreciate the stars, but I can't get Facebook to pay me for them. I spent some time going around in the circles on that yesterday. Early, I accept no side-eye for my ice cream eating already. How did I do with the IRS? They haven't responded to my response yet. Most likely I'm just going to have to pay them a large chunk of money. Large is large. But at least they didn't say, hey, you're going to jail.
Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
You guys don't need to worry about the IRS story. I just got a big scary letter saying I underpaid a couple years ago. And Arlene buying merch works. Cafe Press does pay me, eventually. Venmo and PayPal are the best bets. Especially Venmo. Susan, I don't know. Miles is right over here. Sitting on my packed but not quite packed suitcase. Isn't he? He's winding down for the night, aren't you, Miles? Mm-hmm. Probably should not get this all over, your hair all over this, right before I take it to New York. Okay, they might just be the new camera.
Goodman presents On the Alamo.
I am sleepy. Yelling at people on WCPT. Yelling at truckers. Susan in New York, I'm filming a Netflix thing. So yeah, there should be some more tours there. I still don't have my full schedule. Thinking if I get done filming on time on Tuesday, I might go see Macbeth with Daniel Craig. A little foggy. Yeah, Gary, they moved that one from New York from LA to New York, which I'm fine with. I like the Apple TV Macbeth, the Cohen Macbeth, especially the witch. I've never seen a bad Macbeth. I mean, it's sword fights and witches. How are you gonna screw that up? After Hours tour, it's about time for another one of those. Been a while since I did that one. Usually doing it around when I'm doing school groups. I don't know how many people are. I don't know how many school group kids are gonna start showing up on these. Probably not too many. I don't have too many school groups this year. Good night, Gene. Gary, New York is not that bad to travel in if you're not driving. Or if somebody else is driving you. Kristen, that's doable. Trinity, St. Paul's, Uptown Trinity. Piece of cake. You want to go to Brooklyn for Greenwood? That's a bit more of a trip. There's so much cool stuff there. What do you recommend in DC? I've only been to DC a couple of times and only with school groups. So I've only done Philadelphia for concerts. Octavio, I don't think I'm getting the miles for this one. But I did see they sent me my itinerary. I'm being picked up by some company that has limo in its name. That'd be kind of neat. Alright, you guys, I did not have my nap today. I'm getting a little bit on the sleepy side, so I'll go ahead and plug the upcoming events once again.
Let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
So everybody, coming up next, Sunday morning, True Crime in Chicago's Cemeteries, a tour we can only do virtually because it's all over the place. The week from today, Swindlers, Con Artists, and Gamblers in Chicago history. The next two in-person tours are Saturday at noon, Rose Hill Cemetery. Tickets on sale now. And Grave Robbing 101 a week after that. So everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours saying to stay safe, stay strong, and of course, if you can, stay spooky, everybody.